A steel door slams shut at a rare earth refinery in Inner Mongolia. Inside, conveyor belts stand still. Dust covers machines that haven't moved in weeks. Outside, a group of workers sell broken equipment by the roadside, once part of China's most strategic industry. In the global race for critical minerals, China used to lead. 70% of the world's rare earths came from here. Now, the world is walking away. In April, the US and Ukraine signed a 5-point mineral alliance. Titanium, lithium, rare earths, all exclusive, all locked away from Beijing. So why is China, the giant of global resources, being forced to sell its crown jewels as scrap metal? This isn't a supply chain issue. It's a strategic reversal. And what's happening beneath the mines may be the first crack in the empire of global manufacturing. What if the weapon they used to dominate is the same one bringing them down? It began in silence. No gunshots, no policy speech, no international sanctions, just an order to shut down. In early March 2025, the Baotou Rare Earth Industrial Zone, once the beating heart of China's resource dominance, received a quiet notice. Production halted due to restructuring. No explanation, no timeline, no restart. At first, it seemed like routine maintenance. But as weeks passed, another facility closed. Then another. By mid-April, over 30% of China's northern rare earth facilities had gone dark. Meanwhile, something louder happened 5,000 miles away. The US signed an exclusive mineral extraction deal with Ukraine, locking in access to over 90% of Ukraine's rare earths, lithium, and titanium deposits. China wasn't just excluded, it was blacklisted. The empire that once fueled the global tech and defense industries with strategic minerals was being pushed out of its own game. The blow didn't stop at paperwork. Markets responded fast. Chinese rare earth exports fell 24% within a month. Global buyers rushed to secure non-Chinese alternatives. Shares of leading Chinese mining companies plummeted, some by over 30%. But the damage was more than economic. It was symbolic. For decades, China controlled the narrative. We hold the materials the world cannot live without. From electric vehicles to smartphones, missiles to satellites, everything depended on magnets, oxides, and alloys smelted inside Chinese factories. But few outside noticed the weak link. China mined the raw materials, but it never fully mastered the advanced refining. The most valuable supply chain layers, processing, high-purity extraction, and next-gen applications were already drifting toward the West. Beijing believed that controlling the ground was enough. It wasn't. What changed in 2025 wasn't just politics. It was leverage. The West stopped playing by China's rules. Through the Mineral Security Partnership, the US, Canada, Japan, and the EU began funding direct projects in Africa, Australia, and Eastern Europe. These weren't small gestures, they were full-on replacements. Mines, labs, refining plants, all built to standards China could no longer manipulate. And that's when the silence in Inner Mongolia turned into panic. Without buyers, production stopped. Without production, workers were let go. And without jobs, towns built around these rare earth factories began to empty. Local governments offered subsidies. But no one came, because the problem wasn't local. It was systemic. China had built its global status on one assumption, that no one else could catch up. But the world didn't need to catch up. It just needed to walk away. And that's exactly what it did. From the outside, China's rare earth monopoly still looks intact. But on the inside, it's hollowing out, slowly, silently, like a mine collapsing from its own weight. In Baotou, men who once worked triple shifts now sit idle in front of pawn shops. They don't talk much, but they've all seen the same memo. Temporary closure. No date, no plan, no future. And for the first time, they ask, what happens to a superpower when its most powerful weapon no longer works? The shutdowns were not a coincidence. They were a reaction. But to what? It wasn't just Ukraine. It was the map. Over the past 18 months, the US quietly redrew the global blueprint of resource power. Not through war, not through sanctions, but through something far more permanent. exclusive access. Behind closed doors, the Mineral Security Partnership expanded to include over 75 nations. Deals were signed in Canada, Australia, Namibia, Brazil, and most recently, Ukraine. Every signature came with a clause. No Chinese involvement, direct or indirect. For every mine that opened, a door closed on Beijing, and China noticed. By early April, its Ministry of Commerce scrambled to revive investment talks in Africa. But it was too late. US-backed agencies like the International Development Finance Corporation had already planted their flags. The message was clear: the monopoly is over. But Washington didn't stop at geography. It went deeper into rules of origin, export standards, and trade certifications. A quiet but lethal clause was embedded across agreements: mineral traceability protocols. No rare earths processed in China, or even passed through Chinese facilities, would be accepted into Western supply chains without full disclosure and independent audits. That crushed Beijing's backdoor strategy. For years, China exported rare earths indirectly, shipping through Vietnam, Malaysia, or processed alloys in Mexico. These loopholes once disguised Chinese content behind layers of paperwork. But the new traceability framework sealed every exit. Even companies using Chinese-sourced components faced scrutiny. Tesla had to review its supply chain. So did Apple, Lockheed, and Airbus. They didn't wait for penalties. They walked away, and Beijing couldn't retaliate. Why? Because this wasn't a tariff war. It was a realignment of trust. You can't sanction trust. You can only lose it. At first, Chinese state media dismissed it all as Western overreaction. They showed smiling workers, busy factories, and record-high exports. But satellite images told another story. Dozens of mines, once glowing under 24-hour lights, now sat dark. Rail shipments out of Baotou dropped by 38%. Port activity in Tianjin's rare earth terminals slowed to a crawl. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't embargo. It was disinterest. When the world no longer needs your product, it doesn't attack you. It simply stops answering your calls. Beijing tried pivoting to new markets: Russia, Pakistan, Latin America. But those markets are consumers, not producers. They don't need raw materials. They need infrastructure, capital, and technology. Exactly what China is now struggling to hold on to. And here's the twist. The more China produces, the cheaper rare earth prices fall on the global market. It's not just losing control. It's accelerating its own collapse. The very weapon it once used to pressure the world, strategic resource dominance, is now a burden dragging its economy down. In a small town near Guangzhou, a local mayor told a visiting journalist, "We have rare earths, but no buyers. Our warehouses are full. Our people are leaving." This is no longer a supply chain disruption. It's a lockout, and the key was never in Beijing's hands. They used to brag about it. Annual reports filled with glowing charts. Government-backed investment funds pouring billions into rare earths, EV batteries, and green tech supply chains. China was supposed to be unstoppable. Now, those same reports have vanished from company websites. At the heart of this quiet implosion lies a name most Americans have never heard: China Northern Rare Earth Group. Once the world's largest producer of rare earth oxides, it now operates at less than 40% of its 2024 output. Not because it can't produce, but because no one's buying. Orders from the US dried up first. Then the EU followed. Japan cut its imports by half. South Korea shifted to Australian suppliers. In just 6 months, more than $8.3 billion in export contracts vanished from China's top 5 mineral corporations. They didn't just lose clients. They lost the ecosystem. Companies like Xiamen Tungsten, JLMAG Rare Earth, and Minmetals relied on volume to stay afloat. They mined in Gansu, refined in Jiangxi, shipped from Tianjin, and processed magnets in Shenzhen. But once the magnets stopped moving, so did everything else. Entire logistics chains collapsed inward, like dominoes one after another. A warehouse manager in Shenzhen shared photos on an anonymous WeChat forum. Rows of crates marked for export to Germany and the US. Still sealed. Gathering dust. No pickup scheduled. No invoice issued. When asked why he shared them, he wrote one sentence: "We were told to say business is good. But nothing has moved in 3 months. This isn't just an export problem. It's a liquidity crisis. With revenue vanishing and loan payments piling up, dozens of mid-sized suppliers have defaulted. Over 120 firms in the rare earth supply chain filed for bankruptcy protection between January and April 2025. Most of them were never in the headlines. Small alloy plants in Sichuan, specialized magnet processors in Hunan, extraction startups in Inner Mongolia. They borrowed heavily under China's industrial policy push. And now they're drowning with no bailout in sight. Local governments are overwhelmed. Tax bases have shrunk. Industrial parks built to house these companies now sit half empty. Yet banners still hang. Innovation for a greener China. It's a cruel joke. Even state-owned giants aren't immune. China Minmetals, despite decades of state support, slashed 18% of its workforce in Q1. Overseas branches in Africa and South America are quietly winding down. Internal audits cite operational inefficiencies. But insiders whisper a simpler truth: they've been priced out. Western-backed operations now undercut Chinese exporters, offering better environmental compliance, clearer supply chain standards, and no geopolitical baggage. Buyers aren't just shifting out of fear, they're shifting out of logic. In boardrooms from Berlin to Boston, procurement officers are making new rules. No Chinese content unless no other option. Soon, there may be other options for everything. The final blow might not be economic, it might be reputational. As China loses credibility in global procurement systems, even its non-rare earth industries are feeling the chill. Solar panel exports dropped 19% in Q1. Battery cells 23%. Even copper wire saw its lowest order volume since 2018. Why? Because the world no longer sees China as a guaranteed supplier. They see risk, delay, uncertainty. Inside conference rooms in Shanghai, executives run presentations with blank slides. Forecasts don't matter anymore because they're guessing in the dark. And in places like Baotou, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, a new kind of silence is spreading. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes when everyone's still pretending business is fine. He used to work 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, in a processing plant near Guangzhou, where rare earth metals were purified into the magnetic powder used in electric vehicles. The work was dangerous: acid fumes, high heat, exposure to toxic dust. But it paid well, and it felt important. Now, Zhang Wei spends his mornings outside the same plant. Not as a worker, but as one of many waiting to hear if production will restart. It hasn't. Not in 3 months. The guard at the gate doesn't even ask them to leave anymore. He just looks away. Across China's resource corridor, from Baotou to Jiangxi to parts of Sichuan, thousands of workers like Zhang are stuck in employment limbo. Not officially fired, but not paid either. Their ID cards no longer scan at factory entrances. Their managers no longer answer messages. And their towns no longer have answers. These are not migrant workers who can simply return to farms. Many are specialized machinists, chemical engineers, metallurgy technicians. They trained for one purpose: to serve China's industrial engine. Now that engine is stalling. According to unofficial data leaked on Douyin before being scrubbed, over 210,000 jobs in China's rare earth and EV-related industries were suspended or eliminated between January and April 2025. Official state media says nothing, but the silence only deepens the fear. In northern Inner Mongolia, a family of 4 now survives on the grandmother's pension. The son, laid off from a refining lab, sells homemade dumplings near the local bus station. The daughter-in-law, once an office clerk at a logistics firm, now stays home, watching job boards that never update. She doesn't apply anymore. "I'm not young. I'm not cheap. And I used to have purpose," she told a foreign journalist in an unlisted interview. Her name was censored. For younger workers, the disillusionment runs deeper. At a job fair in Changsha, a line of men in identical blue uniforms stood shoulder to shoulder. Most had just come off contracts from battery and magnet factories in Guangdong. Some had degrees in material science. Others had left university early for what were once future-proof careers. They now fight for delivery jobs, for warehouse shifts, for anything that pays more than 3,000 yuan per month. Meanwhile, local governments push res-killing programs, short online courses promising AI, e-commerce, or software development, but they don't come with jobs, just certificates and silence. What's worse, even those who pivot find the door closed. Companies in tech or services avoid hiring former industrial workers. They don't fit the brand, one recruiter whispered in a viral clip before it was deleted. So what happens to an entire class of workers when their skill sets become obsolete? Not because of technology, but because their country lost the market. In the past, China's miracle was built on absorbing labor. Now, it is expelling them quietly, systematically, without headlines. And the workers know it. In private WeChat groups, they share job tips, but also coping strategies. How to delay mortgage payments. How to fake health records to avoid insurance cuts. How to tell your child that this month there is no school lunch. They don't blame the West. They don't chant slogans. They just ask one question. If we are no longer needed, why won't they say it out loud? In a nation built on work, the greatest punishment may not be poverty. It's being forgotten. There was no declaration, no headline that read, "China has been isolated." And yet it's happening. Not with troops, not with sanctions, but with supply chains, contracts, and silence. While factories in Baotou and Ganzhou turn cold, the rest of the world is heating up with activity. In Ukraine, drills break ground on a massive lithium site co-funded by the US and EU. In Namibia, rare earth refining facilities are being built with Japanese technology. In Australia, export lanes bypass Beijing entirely, going straight to American defense contractors. None of these deals mention China. They don't have to. This is strategic omission. Beijing is simply not invited. The global resource architecture is being rebuilt, with China on the outside looking in. At home, the ripple effect is reaching further than just factories. In second-tier cities like Shijiazhuang, Zhongshan, and Luzhou, local banks are quietly tightening lending to manufacturers in sensitive sectors. The unspoken rule: if your raw material or client list includes the US or EU, you're too risky to fund, which leaves thousands of small and medium-sized firms stranded. No export options, no credit, no path forward. The social cost is harder to measure but impossible to miss. In April 2025 alone, internal security units in Guangdong and Jiangxi reported a 47% increase in public disturbances linked to labor disputes. That's the official term for what locals describe as workers storming factories, demanding unpaid wages, and clashing with police in riot gear. But most of these scenes don't reach public screens. Over 15,000 online posts tied to worker protests were deleted in a single week. Accounts sharing videos had their IDs suspended. Journalists were warned off the story. What remains is a strange kind of national theater. On television, anchors report robust exports and positive recovery trends. In the streets, LED signs still display the slogans. Made in China, stronger than ever. But the foot traffic is gone. Shops shuttered. Cafes empty by 6 p.m. Even in Beijing, the capital of control, the cracks are visible. A viral photo showed a long line outside the Argentine embassy. Students, engineers, and mid-level professionals all applying for immigration papers. The post disappeared within hours. It doesn't matter. The message is spreading. There is no future here. Meanwhile, overseas, the US is not just cutting China out, it's building something bigger. The Clean Minerals Framework now governs over 75% of rare earth imports into G7 countries. A new digital ledger system ensures full traceability. If any component touches China, the deal is dead. This is not protectionism. This is replacement. The goal is not to punish China. It's to make China irrelevant. And that may be the most painful wound of all. In past decades, when Western countries pushed back, Beijing would retaliate, cut shipments, raise prices, threaten disruption. But now, there's nothing left to cut. Because buyers have already gone elsewhere. Because no one's waiting on shipments from Tianjin anymore. Because China no longer holds the final piece of the puzzle. And in the geopolitical chessboard, that means checkmate without a single move left to play. Inside China, few will say this out loud. But the silence speaks volumes. We're not under attack. One industry insider posted anonymously. We're just no longer part of the conversation. China once believed it could control the future by owning what the world needed most. Rare earths, lithium, titanium, the materials of tomorrow. But now, tomorrow is arriving without them. No embargo, no war, just silence. Buyers turned away, contracts vanished. Warehouses full of metals no one is waiting for. The lights are still on in some factories, but they're not working. They're pretending the world still revolves around them. And maybe that's the final twist. Power doesn't disappear with a bang. It fades one contract, one shipment, one erased headline at a time. So the question isn't, what will China do next? The real question is, when you've lost your leverage, but haven't admitted it yet, how long before the entire system starts breaking from the inside?